Suitland is a beautiful place, but in contrast, the crime rate is much higher than the average for all American communities, regardless of its size. Sadly, a horrible crime occurred in Suitland in 1979 when a young mother was kidnapped and brutally murdered, leaving her devoted family behind. On March 20th, 1951, Vicky Lynn Belk was born into the family of Lonnie and Maydell Belk. Vicky, the eldest of the 6 Belk siblings, was a devoted big sister to April, Grendon, Judy, and Kay, as well as her younger brother, Lonnie Jr., who goes by Ricky. Vicky grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, along with all of her siblings. Following their parents, Lonnie and Maydell made a successful lawsuit against the Board of Education over the school desegregation ruling. Vicky and her sister, Judy, became the first African-American students to attend Minnie Howard Elementary School in Alexandria, Virginia. Vicky later graduated from T.C. Williams High School in 1969. Vicky grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. The Belk family was a family that always stood by their values and was prepared to defend the rights of their community and family. The Belk family persisted in being role models for everyone in their community and for one another, even after suffering violence and losing a few fights. Like her family, Vicky also took a strong interest in speaking out and defending her neighborhood. Vicky's thoughtful and giving nature made her a role model for her siblings. Vicky became the first person in her family to graduate from college during a period when she and her community were rarely given opportunities. In 1974, Vicky graduated from St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a Bachelor of Arts in Education. Her diligence and proficiency in her chosen field paid off, as she was hired as a management analyst in the Department of Agriculture's Office of Operations and Finance in Washington, D.C. Vicky, a 28-year-old woman, was juggling parenting her young son, Lamont Belk, and her job in Washington in 1979. She remained active in her community, working as a Sunday school teacher and church clerk at Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria, which Vicky's great-grandfather, Wesley Casey, co-founded. Vicky's family maintained regular communication and was very close to one another. Vicky's entire family came together to celebrate Judy's marriage at Oakland Baptist Church in early August 1979. Vicky went to the wedding with James Hill, her co-worker turned boyfriend. Vicky assisted with much of the event's planning and served as Judy's maid of honor. A few days after Judy's wedding, Vicky returned to her regular life with her boyfriend, James Hill, who worked for the Agriculture Department. Vicky and James got ready for the day on August 27, 1979, as they usually did. From their Prince George's County apartment, they took a ride in James' 1972 Buick to the Stadium Armory Station, where they parked the car and took the train to their offices. That day, Vicky had some errands to run and planned to finish them after lunch. She told James she would see him in the parking lot after work that evening. James arrived at the parking lot after finishing work and discovered that Vicky was nowhere to be found. The car was still gone. James waited until dusk and became concerned when Vicky was nowhere to be found. He tried calling some of Vicky's close friends and family members that evening to see if they had any information about her whereabouts, but nobody had any idea. James waited for Vicky for hours after getting home, but she never showed up. When James attempted to report his girlfriend Vicky missing to the Prince George's County Police Department early on August 28, 1979, the officials informed him that an official report could only be filed 72 hours after Vicky's disappearance because she was an adult. All James could do was wait and hope Vicky would come back. James informed Vicky's family of the news. They became very concerned, especially Maydell, Vicky's mother. She went crazy because she was unable to comprehend what was happening. It was unusual for Vicky to not check on her son, and it was not like her to not call or let her loved ones know where she was going. Now that her fearless daughter was gone, Maydell could only fear the worst. Vicky's family endured a very agonizing 72 hours of waiting, and as the day wore on, they realized something was seriously wrong. A local teenage boy discovered something strange in the woods on August 29, 1979, while out for a bike ride on Metropolitan Church Road, which is close to Route 227 in Maryland. Upon closer inspection, he discovered it was a dead body. After riding his bike home, he told his mother about the horrific discovery, and she contacted the police. When police arrived at the scene, they discovered a dead woman who was only partially clothed and had been shot in the head. After being taken to Baltimore's chief medical examiner, the woman's body was identified as Vicky Lynn Belk. Homicide was declared the cause of death. Vicky's parents, Maydell and Lonnie, received a call from the Charles County Sheriff's Office informing them that they needed to come to the police department as they had some information about their daughter. On their way to the police station, Lonnie and Maydell were actually pretty upbeat. They believed that perhaps Vicky had just been injured and had since been located. But the most terrible news was delivered to Maydell and Lonnie when they got to the sheriff's office. Their oldest daughter, who was also their firstborn child, had been killed and abandoned by the side of the road. Maydell instantly started crying uncontrollably because she was in too much pain. She cursed the man who had done this to her daughter. Vicky's family was overcome with grief and was severely traumatized by the violent and chaotic nature of the crime. After gathering themselves, they handed the case over to the detectives in the hopes that Vicky's killer would be apprehended and dealt with fairly. An inquiry into the killing got underway. The crime scene had already been secured, and detectives were continuously gathering evidence and looking for clues. Vicky's brown shoes, pantyhose, jewelry, bra, and slip-in dress were among the items the investigators found. They also found some hair samples and nail clippings. Despite being tested several times, the items discovered at the crime scene proved to be of little use to the investigators. Vicky's relatives, co-workers, and those in the vicinity of the crime scene were all questioned by the detectives during their numerous interviews. Nothing seemed to be happening with the investigation, not even after some leads were followed up on. Vicky had taken James' car to run errands the day before she vanished, and the detectives were still searching for it in the hopes that it would contain information that would help them find Vicky's killer. James' Buick was eventually discovered abandoned in Washington, D.C. within a few days. Unfortunately, though, the murderer's trail was completely erased. Despite the lack of fresh information in the case, the detectives were committed to identifying Vicky's killer. They kept all of the evidence in the hopes that it could be retested with more sophisticated technology. In an attempt to identify Vicky's killer and bring him to justice, Charles County detectives collaborated with the Maryland State Police, Bode Technology in Lorton, Virginia, and Sorensen's laboratories in Salt Lake City, Utah, over the course of the following few years as more and more cutting-edge technologies were being introduced. However, they were once again met with failure. The investigation into Vicky's assault and murder gradually came to a standstill as more time passed, and the identity of her killer remained a mystery. Vicky was killed in 1979, and at the time, DNA samples could not be tested due to lack of equipment or technology. The 1980s saw the birth of the technology as law enforcement began compiling a sizable database of fingerprints and DNA samples from suspects of crimes across the nation. When DNA testing became a little more sophisticated in the early 2000s, investigators in Vicky's case retested the evidence. When Vicky's dress was examined again, it turned out to have a foreign bodily fluid on it. This allowed the investigators to create a profile of a possible suspect. Nevertheless, there was still much room for improvement in testing technology, so the created profile was unfit to be added to any database or compared to any suspects. Years went by, and the investigators continued to use new technology to repeatedly test Vicky's possessions that they had discovered at the crime scene. When Vicky's slip and dress were retested using forensic technology in 2022, the detectives were able to create a DNA profile of a male whose bodily fluids were found on Vicky's dress. This gave law enforcement some hope that Vicky's murderer would be apprehended and imprisoned. The newly created male profile was compared to profiles in CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. The forensic team meticulously examined several profiles before discovering a match in their database. The owner of this profile was Andrew Taylor, a 61-year-old man. When the results were communicated to the sheriff's office in November 2022, investigators made the decision to delve deeper into Andrew's past, including his criminal record. At the time, Andrew, who is now elderly, was residing in a Washington, D.C. nursing home and rehabilitation center. By monitoring him closely and persistently obtaining information about his background, the detectives discovered that Andrew had resided in his aunt's Charles County house at the time of Vicky's murder. Vicky's body was discovered less than 4 miles from the house, but this information wasn't enough to nab Andrew. To establish his role in the horrifying murder, the investigators still required more substantial evidence. To do this, investigators obtained a warrant for Andrew's arrest in March 2023 and entered the assisted living facility where he was staying. Detectives needed more proof, so they confronted Andrew and took a sample of his saliva to compare with the DNA from the crime scene again. The unexpected visit made Andrew aware that he was under suspicion for Vicky's murder, but given his current state of health, the detectives were not concerned that he would run out of town. Authorities knew he was staying put, even though the lab tests would take weeks to complete and results would not be available. Andrew's health was rapidly deteriorating and he could hardly perform any activities due to his amputated leg. On June 16, 2023, the DNA match with Andrew's profile was confirmed once more. He was charged with first-degree murder and assault. On June 22, 2023, he was arrested and ordered held without bond. Vicky's family and the detectives who worked on her case addressed the media in a press conference. Vicky's family was inconsolable, living through the past as the investigation's findings evoked painful memories. Julie Belk remembered her late sister by sharing her favorite memory, while Vicky's son, Lamont Belk, thanked the police. Vicky's brother, Ricky Belk, described what happened to his mother after the tragic event. It is unclear at this time whether Andrew has entered a plea. He is being represented by the Maryland Public Defender's Office, which declined to comment on the matter. Vicky was unfamiliar with Andrew, and his assault on her was unplanned. Andrew was just 18 when he committed the horrible act. Vicky was robbed of her opportunity to lead a fulfilling life. The people who loved her were deeply saddened by her death, but they also felt some relief and closure now that her killer was in prison. Vicky's son, Lamont Belk, joined the Cobb County District Attorney's Office as an assistant district attorney after earning degrees from George Mason University School of Law and Morehouse College in 2009. Kay, Vicky's sister, is a retired surgeon from the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office in California. The lone boy among numerous sisters, Lonnie, holds a lieutenant position in the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department. In 1980, following Vicky's untimely death, the Belk family established the Vicky Belk Scholarship Foundation to pay tribute to Vicky and offer scholarships in her name. The scholarship board's job is to help raise money for graduating seniors at Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, the church where Vicky Lynn Belk was baptized, and to offer opportunities that carry on her legacy. Through the scholarship program, approximately 100 students from Oakland Baptist Church have received awards thus far. Vicky's family wants to perpetuate her passion for learning in Oakland Baptist Church youth. On May 2, 1982, Jessica Dodson was born in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a small American town. It was a peaceful community where most people knew one another well and were engaged in farming. Jessica helped her parents look after their 2 younger brothers while they were at work from a young age. Jessica became more self-sufficient as a result, and her parents could always count on her. In order to pay for her first car at the age of 15, she started working a part-time job at a nearby restaurant. A few years later, she had saved up enough cash to fulfill her dream of owning a red Pontiac. Jessica had good grades despite working a part-time job, and she began to plan to go to college to become an accountant after graduation. When Jessica, then 17 years old, started her senior year in the fall of 1999, she also began dating a boy, which made her very happy. Her day started out normally in the morning on Friday, September 10th. While Jessica was still asleep, her parents left for work, her younger brothers left for school, and went to the bus stop. Jessica stayed at home and was expected to take her car to school shortly after her brothers. When her mother got home, sometime around noon, she noticed something strange right away. Jessica was supposed to be in class, but her car was parked in front of the house. The mother went to her daughter's room after entering the home. When Jessica was not in her bedroom, her first assumption was that she might have overslept and missed school. The mother then speculated that Jessica might have called her father to see if he could give her a ride to school. When she called him, he replied that he had left for work by himself that morning. The mother attempted to start Jessica's car with a spare key she had taken from the house. thinking there might be a problem with it. But as she got closer to the vehicle, she noticed an unsettling scene. First of all, the driver's door was ajar. Secondly, and perhaps more concerning, Jessica's phone was resting on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen. One of Jessica's shoes and her keys were under the front seat, and her work clothes, purse, and textbooks were in the back seat. The mother assumed the worst right away. It was obvious that someone had opened Jessica's phone to dial 911, but had stopped short. Furthermore, it is clear that Jessica could not simply leave her belongings in the car and drive away. She would have needed to walk several miles along the road because the family lived on the outskirts of town. Jessica's parents discovered that their daughter had not shown up for class when they called the school. The school should have informed them about this, but for some reason it hadn't. A few hours later, Jessica's parents received a call from Jessica's best friend at the restaurant where they worked, informing them that Jessica had not arrived for her shift, which further alarmed them. Jessica's parents decided to call the police after becoming concerned about her absence from school and work, as well as the fact that her belongings, including a phone with 9 and 1 dial, had been left in an unlocked car. But the sheriff just said that Jessica probably wandered off and would come back sometime. He did not even seem to notice that she could not go very far without one of her shoes because it was left in the car. Jessica's parents begged the sheriff to launch an investigation because they thought their daughter might be in danger, but he refused, so they were forced to go back home. Following that, Jessica's parents made the decision to act independent. Despite reaching out to friends, family, and acquaintances, nobody had reported seeing her. They began looking for Jessica together all over the town, but she was nowhere to be found. Her parents returned to the sheriff the following morning to inform him that Jessica had not returned home. He sent 2 officers to check her car this time, but their parents were now dealing with a second issue. The officers touched everything inside the car with their bare hands, as they looked over it without wearing gloves. Jessica's room was not checked by them, despite the fact that it was standard procedure. Jessica's parents attempted to seek assistance from the local media by bringing attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of interest. After being let down by law enforcement once more, they started their own search and started handing out flyers with information about Jessica along with family and friends. Leading the search were Jessica's father and his brother, Stanley, who was familiar with the area. They made the decision to search the area around a nearby river out of fear for the worst. Because of its overgrown and remote location, the area had a bad reputation and was frequented by local drug dealers and other criminals. Jessica's family searched the rough terrain by the river for hours without finding any sign of her. A very strange thing happened the following morning. Jessica's parents were at home with their son, who was playing in the yard. He hurried inside after hearing what he thought was his sister's voice calling for assistance. Grabbing his shotgun, Jessica's father hurried outside to try and find the source of the cry. Simultaneously, his brother arrived at their residence and promptly joined the search. They saw something soon after. David Brooks, their 40-year-old neighbor, had smoke rising from his property. They saw him burning what appeared to be clothes on his land as they got closer. Because of the suspicious appearance, Jessica's father requested permission from Brooks to search his farm. But Brooks declined, requesting that they depart. There were other strange aspects about Brooks as well. His family and Jessica's relatives had a regular relationship up until Jessica vanished. But not long afterward, when Brooks started acting strangely, he began driving past their house slowly, on a regular basis, while grinning menacingly at them. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from an unidentified man who just breathed heavily without saying anything. They had a suspicion that Brooks was responsible, but they were unable to fathom his actions. Jessica's parents made the decision to talk to the police again. After seeing Brooks burn clothes on his land, the police had initially shown little interest in the case. They agreed after the family shared their observations and requesting that police bring cadaver dogs to Brooks. The dogs found the fire pit on Brooks' property after tracking Jessica using her clothes, but no significant evidence was discovered. In one of the sheds, the dogs also found black gloves indicating the presence of a decomposing stench. Even though Brooks continued to act suspiciously during the search, the police were unable to link him to Jessica's disappearance and left empty-handed. Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI after being let down by the police. Normally, the Bureau declines to become involved in an investigation based only on calls from the families of missing individuals. But on this occasion, they made the decision to do so right away. After conducting extensive research and considering the unsettling information provided by Jessica's parents, the FBI came to the conclusion that something genuinely horrifying may have happened to Jessica. After that, a thorough investigation got underway, one that the local police had been hesitant to carry out. Fingerprints from Jessica's car and room were gathered by FBI agents. They also seized all potential evidence for analysis and sent it all to the lab. Additionally, the investigator coordinated a thorough ground search with the help of helicopters and volunteer recruitment. They thought that maybe Jessica's body was in the pond near her house, so they looked all over the bottom. After thoroughly searching Brooks's farm, FBI agents discovered something extremely concerning. They discovered a printed picture of Jessica inside one of the sheds. Detectives were almost positive that Brooks had some sort of involvement in her disappearance following this unsettling discovery. Joseph, his 35-year-old brother, was also a suspect because of his peculiar behavior during the police search of his property. During the search, something went wrong. Investigators concentrated all of their efforts on the search in the area, nearly certain that Jessica had died, since they could not find any evidence strong enough to bring the brothers to justice. 17 days after her disappearance, on September 27th, the police got a call. While driving beside the river where Jessica's father had first looked for her, a woman noticed something odd next to a tree off the road and decided to investigate. As she got closer, she noticed it resembled a human body and immediately dialed 911. When the FBI agents got there, they did in fact discover a young woman who was missing a few fingers and limbs and was dead. Detectives came to the conclusion that she had been sexually abused because she had a rope tied around her legs with paint traces in red and silver, and some of her clothes were missing. The decomposition was so advanced that they were unable to positively identify it as Jessica. After visiting her home, the policeman asked her parents for assistance in identifying her. Jessica's mother concurred, but her father found it difficult to look at his dead daughter. When she arrived at the scene, she was initially unable to identify her, but soon realized that the small butterfly tattoo on her body was in the exact same location as her daughter's. Subsequently, medical professionals established the deceased's identity and concluded that strangulation was the cause of death. Her body was also covered in numerous bruises. The most shocking discovery was that Jessica had been alive for about 3 days after going missing, even though experts had determined that her limbs and fingers were detached post-mortem, indicating that she was still alive at the time. It implied that although the police had a chance to save her, they did nothing at all to do so. The FBI decided to re-interview Brooks following the body's discovery, and this time they discovered something new. Brooks initially told the FBI that he had seen Jessica the morning she disappeared when they had first spoken. In the second interview, he altered his account to claim that he had not seen her at all that day. He said he was at home that morning in bed with his wife, and she had given a different account of her husband's testimony when the detectives questioned her. Even though there was no such evidence, the FBI persisted in questioning Brooks, asking him what he would do if they discovered his fingerprints on the victim's body. Brooks' response was very suspicious. He said that in that scenario he would have to admit everything. The FBI chose to arrest him and proceed with the trial after he failed a polygraph test. They knew that, since they had not discovered any conclusive evidence connecting Brooks to the murder, the likelihood of a guilty verdict was minimal. All they had was unsettling, albeit circumstantial evidence of his involvement. The detectives kept working the case and looked for any more evidence. While preparing for the trial, investigators remembered another intriguing detail. Something like the rope that was used to bind the victim's legs was discovered when searching Brooks' vehicle. But no DNA samples were discovered on it, so this is just more circumstantial evidence. Start of the trial was in January 2003. Brooks' attorney maintained that there was no evidence at all and asserted his client's innocence. During the trial, another thing was revealed. Investigators discovered the victim's missing limbs in close proximity to the body when they found it. After putting them in designated containers, they gave them to the neighborhood police. They allowed the boxes to decompose extensively at room temperature, disregarding labels that advised storing them in the refrigerator. Therefore, even in the unlikely event that there was any evidence such as possible DNA traces from the murderer, it was lost as a result of this mistake. The other circumstantial evidence against Brooks was not strong enough. Ultimately, the man was released because the jury was unable to come to a unanimous verdict. State statutes said that he could only face new charges in the event that fresh evidence surfaced. This was a devastating blow to Jessica's parents. They were nearly certain that Brooks was responsible for the death of their daughter. Furthermore, their daughter might have been saved if the police had taken their duties more seriously. Thus, they ultimately gave up on getting justice. This case was not resolved in the ensuing years and was eventually nearly completely dropped. Lynn Hunt, a new detective, started working with the local police force in 2012. She was tasked with investigating unsolved cases, and she was drawn to Jessica Dyson's murder right away. She was horrified to see how careless her predecessors had been after reading through the case files. The majority of the documents contained numerous mistakes, lacked any mention of discussions with the parties concerned, and improperly documented the evidence. To put it another way, it was handled so poorly that she was forced to essentially begin the investigation anew. Her first move, 13 years after the murder, was to get in touch with Jessica's family. She was given a box containing Jessica's possessions from her car by one of her brothers, who is now an adult and lives apart from his parents. Ever since the police gave the family back these items, he had held on to it. Hunt was astounded once more at how heedlessly her colleagues had handled the evidence and neglected to store it in accordance with protocol. It was unlikely that these things would help her now after many years. Still, she examined everything she could find with diligence. She soon found out a fascinating detail. It was the report from Brooks's medical examination among the documents. It said that he had an extremely low IQ of only 61. This sparked questions about all police activities, including questioning Brooks. He may not have fully understood most of the questions, and may not have provided adequate answers due to his significantly low IQ. All of this made Hunt wonder if the man had anything to do with the case at all, since his strange behavior could just as easily have been caused by his extremely low IQ. Hunt then started to speculate as to who else might have killed this person. She did a thorough investigation on every person connected to the case or residing nearby. This continued until September 2014, which was almost 15 years after Jessica's passing. A departmental colleague called Hunt with some interesting information. An inmate at a Kentucky state prison asserted that he knew Jessica Dyson's killer's true identity. Hunt was a little skeptical about this lead. When prisoners wanted to provide the police with information, it usually ended in disappointment and wasted time. Many of them merely make up stories to get early release or better treatment while incarcerated. Nevertheless, she realized that she had to follow up on this lead to ensure it was genuine. She went to see the man who was supposed to have the information at the prison. He claimed that, for a while, he and another person convicted of the same charge child abuse shared a cell. The two grew close on this common ground and occasionally shared information about their crimes. The cellmate informed him one day that he had killed Jessica Dyson, among other things. The detective was shocked when the informant then dropped a bombshell revealing this man's name. It was Jessica's uncle, Stanley Dyson, her father's brother. The informant claims Stanley admitted to him that while Jessica was residing in their home, he had sexually abused her for a number of years. If she ever discussed it, he threatened to kill her, or someone close to her. When Jessica got a boyfriend in the spring of 1999, Stanley became concerned that she would eventually confess to him about the abuse she had received from her own uncle. Jessica was home alone on September 10th when Stanley showed up in the morning. After loading all of her belongings into her vehicle, she went outside. Jessica resisted Stanley's demands that she end her relationship with her boyfriend, threatening to expose him if he did not leave her alone. She reached for the phone to try to dial 911 as he began to threaten her. Jessica managed to escape Stanley's attempt to grab her and escape inside the house. Before bringing her to an abandoned shed close to where her body would eventually be discovered, the man followed her to her room, struck her, and bound her in her sheets. After torturing and mutilating her for several days, Stanley killed her, moved her body to a prominent spot close to the road, and buried the sheets beneath the shed. He added that he amputated a few of the victims in an attempt to fool the police into believing drug traffickers were responsible for the murder. Detective Hunt came to the conclusion that the informant could not have made this detail up because only Jessica's closest relatives were aware of the missing limbs. Finally, he mentioned that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe next to the shed under a broken tree. Hunt made the decision to confirm all of the details regarding the hidden evidence. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives who agreed to help with the search because no one from the local police department could assist her due to staffing shortages. She chose to wait to inform them that Stanley might be the murderer in order to gather proof for these startling claims. They did not find any hints on the first day of the search. They dug in the areas that fit the informant's description in the pouring rain, but they got nothing. Hunt and Jessica's brother went back to the location the following day. They started excavating the soil inside the abandoned barn he had indicated to them along the way, and almost instantly a long-awaited breakthrough occurred. A bed sheet that had been buried was found. Hunt got the evidence and raced over to Jessica's place. Her parents had not altered her room in all these years. It was just the way it had been since the day their daughter disappeared. This allowed Hunt to verify that the discovered bedsheet was a piece of Jessica's bedding. The other linens had the same pattern, but it was absent from the bed. Following this discovery, Stanley was taken into custody and questioned right away. Despite looking visibly shaken during the conversation with the detectives, he refused to confess to the crime. He was eventually accused of murder and the matter went to trial. The fact that his brother had done such a horrible thing to his daughter was beyond shocking to Jessica's father. He went through a period of total denial before accepting this intolerable truth. He later remembered that Stanley had suggested looking for Jessica's body near the river in the early days of her disappearance, but he became ill during the search, so his brother drove him home. As it turned out, Jessica was found only a few hundred yards from the barn where this had occurred, indicating that Stanley may have purposefully misled them into thinking she was still alive. Detective Hunt conducted background research on the suspect in an effort to gather more evidence before the trial. Hunt quickly learned of an even more unsettling truth. Though she already knew he had served time for abusing another girl in their family, a number of other women who were close to Stanley reported to the police that he had molested them when they were little. He would tell their family that he was temporarily homeless and ask them to let him stay in their house for a while. This pattern was consistent. Stanley used threats to silence the girls when he was left alone with them and carried out his heinous acts. After hearing all of these accounts, the police came to the conclusion that Stanley had been doing this for 30 years. Despite this, Detective Hunt recognized that it would be difficult to convict Stanley of the murder because there were so few clear-cut pieces of evidence, like fingerprints or DNA. She kept working on the case until she came across a box of old files that she had not yet looked through. Examining its contents, Hunt was struck once more with the ineptitude of her predecessor's handling of the case. There was a letter in the box, dated June 26, 2002. The same account which Hunt heard from the prisoner in Kentucky just 12 years later, was submitted to the authorities by another informant. Stanley had already been incarcerated since the summer of 2002 for attacking a minor relative. He told his cellmate about killing Jessica during that period. The cellmate, who happened to be a police informant, wrote a letter to the department in charge of the case, detailing all of Stanley's heinous crimes against his niece. And what do you think happened? Did the police just disregard the letter, perhaps convinced of Brooks's involvement during those years, and stop looking into other possibilities? Hunt was again displeased with the incompetence of her colleagues. Had they been more diligent in their work, this case might have been resolved in 2002. She could only wait for the trial now, years later, in the hopes that Stanley would at last receive long overdue justice for his deeds. Stanley proclaimed his innocence before the proceedings started in 2015. Jessica's parents were in the courtroom and they could barely look at the relative who had ruined their lives. And they were angry that he could not just come clean and offer them some sort of resolution. Due to the dearth of strong evidence against him, the prosecution thought there was little chance of getting a guilty verdict on the murder charges. The assault accusations against the other girls in the family presented another issue. The prosecution chose to offer Stanley a plea deal because all of them would have to testify in court and give detailed accounts of what Stanley had done to them. In exchange for Stanley's confession about his assaults on family members and his involvement in Jessica's murder, they agreed to remove the death penalty. Ultimately, he consented and entered a guilty plea. He was not obliged to reveal any particulars about the crimes as part of the agreement. Jessica's parents were unhappy about it because they wanted to know the whole truth, but Stanley had to keep quiet because of the terms of the plea agreement. The murderer was sentenced to 20 years in prison with the possibility of release after 15 years. Stanley may be released at age 71, as he was 56 at the time of sentencing. Following the trial, Jessica's father pledged that he would wait for his brother to take matters into his own hands if he did not pass away in jail. In 2019, Stanley denied killing Jessica in his first interview. He said that he had been at work that morning. However, after 20 years, it was impossible to confirm. Furthermore, he was unable to explain how two unconnected informants could have come up with the same tales, including details like a bed-lin in burial site that the murderer alone knew. Detectives have yet to rule out David Brooks's possible small role in the case. Stanley could have asked for assistance in getting rid of the victim's belongings because Stanley knew him. Brooks may not have fully understood the situation given his low IQ. He may have set the girl's clothes on fire, and Stanley may have given him the gloves that contained the body odor that the dogs had picked up on. He might have left Jessica's picture in Stanley's shed so that it would frame him. The truth, though, might never be known because Brooks passed away in 2021 from cardiac issues. It is important to remember the incident where Jessica's younger brother mistook a cry for assistance outside for his sister on the third day after Jessica vanished. There is still no way to know for sure what transpired at that moment. Stanley was detaining the girl several miles from her residence in the barn, so it is possible that she was still alive. There is a somewhat unlikely possibility, but the child most likely imagined it because they were stressed or else someone else was screaming. Stanley was probably not far from the house because, as we remember, he drove up just after Jessica's father hurried outside. It is possible that the girl was unconscious or had her mouth taped shut while in his car, but this theory does not seem very likely. 42-year-old Ricky Lubert lived in Texas County, Missouri in 2007. He was last seen on November 10th. 3 days later, a neighbor of his became concerned that he had not seen Ricky for a few days. Inside of Ricky's home, the neighbor found his body and called 911. Investigators quickly had a suspect, Tommy Wetzel. Investigators at the time did not specify what led them to Wetzel. After an exhaustive investigation trying to find more evidence against Wetzel, he was charged and convicted of a federal weapons violation, but he was never charged with taking Ricky's life. That all changed after the Texas County Sheriff's Office opened a new investigation into Ricky's case in January of 2022. The Sheriff's Office was aided with the resources from the television program Cold Justice. Investigators from the Sheriff's Office reviewed the original case files and evidence. Based on that information, investigators conducted new interviews of witnesses and a suspect and had additional analysis performed on evidence in the case. The new investigative efforts, as well as the prior ones, led to an indictment for armed criminal action and discharge of a firearm at or from a motor vehicle and for taking Ricky's life against Wetzel. He was arrested on June 29, 2022 by the Barton County Sheriff's Office at his home in Liberal, Missouri. He has been transported back to Texas County. Texas County Sheriff Scott Lindsay had this to say in a statement. Today represents an important step in seeking justice for Ricky Lubert. I hope that this arrest is some sort of comfort to the family of the victim, even though it has taken 14+ years to reach this point. I would like to commend all the investigators that worked on this case, but especially the deputies that were assigned to reopen the investigation and approached it with a dedication and perseverance. I would also like to thank the staff and resources provided by Cold Justice to assist with the investigation. The motive of the crime is unclear at the moment. The Cold Justice team, who played an important part in solving the case, had this to say in a press release. Nearly 15 years later, there is justice for Ricky's brother Randy and his 2 boys. This is all possible due to the hard work of the Texas County Sheriff's Department and the assistance of Steve Spangler and Kelly Siegler. Our experts, Eric Devlin, Kathy Pernier, and the Cole Justice team worked incredibly hard to support the investigation team. Cole Justice has contributed to more than 50 arrests in cold cases around the U.S. 22-year-old Catherine Blavt lived in Simpsonville, South Carolina in 2016. She was married to 27-year-old John Tufton Blavt. He worked as a U.S. Army recruiter in Greenville County. Catherine disappeared from her home on October 25, 2016. The following day, friends found her body in the basement of a house that had been abandoned for more than 20 years. The house was a place where Catherine and her friends used to hang out as children. The post-mortem examination revealed that Catherine had been fatally stabbed with a knife. Less than a month after she was found, Simpsonville police obtained a warrant for John Blavt's arrest, charging him with taking Catherine's life and possession of a weapon during a violent crime. But by then, Blavt had fled the state with his 17-year-old girlfriend. He was classified as an Army deserter. The girlfriend is Hannah Thompson, a Fountain Inn, South Carolina. She was reported missing by her parents on November 21, 2016, just 3 days after police issued a warrant for Blavt's arrest. Blavt and Thompson was spotted in Las Cruces, New Mexico a few days later. Then, after the U.S. Marshals joined the search to find Blavt, they learned that he and Thompson traveled through Alabama, Texas, and California. In December 2016, Thompson called her parents requesting to return home to South Carolina. She was found safe in Oregon on December 12, having been abandoned by Blavt. Simpsonville police stated that Blavt was known to live around wooded areas near the Oregon-Washington border. The case was featured on In Pursuit with John Walsh in 2019. On July 20, 2022, the Pacific Northwest Violent Offender Task Force, led by the U.S. Marshals Service, captured Blavt following a lead received at the Marshals headquarters earlier in 2022. The nature of the tip was not disclosed, but officials stated Blavt had been living as Ben Klein when they arrested him without incident. Jackson Sheriff Nathan Sickler said, "We are glad this offender is in custody and the process can begin to seek justice for the victim and her family. The work of this local violent offender task force is extremely important to the safety of our community, and we are proud of their efforts and our continued partnership." Catherine's mother, Patricia Piver, said, "Losing a child is unbearable. We knew John did it, but when he ran, our hearts sunk. And then he disappeared off the face of the map. And months turned into years. And now 5.5 years later, you lose hope, and you just gotta find something to hold on to. But getting that call yesterday, I'm still shaking," Piver continued. "It was the most amazing phone call ever." She also told reporters that Catherine's relationship consisted of intimate partner violence and hoped others could learn from her daughters. "He or she will beat you one day and then the next day apologize. Don't believe it. Catherine got away from him and moved back home, but they're not going to change. They threaten, beat, and hurt you. Get away and stay away." John Blavt was booked into the Jackson County Jail, where he awaits to be taken back to South Carolina to face prosecution. 52-year-old Andrea Sinata lived in Arlington County, Virginia in 1998. She was a single mother and worked as a librarian. Andrea was engaged to a guy named James Christopher Johnson. Johnson discovered Andrea's lifeless body in the bedroom closet of the apartment they shared August 22, 1998. Johnson told authorities that coins and bags were missing from the apartment, and that her hatchback Honda Civic and its keys were also gone. Were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. He also told police that Andrea had given an old computer to a man doing maintenance work around the apartment 4 weeks before her life was taken. According to Johnson, Andrea was having problems with the computer and the maintenance worker was in their apartment a few times to work on it. The maintenance worker was identified as Bobby Joe Leonard. Leonard was viewed as a suspect but was not charged, and the case went cold. The case was reopened in 2013 at the insistence of Andrea's son, Kevin Sinata. In 2018, Leonard told the police he had in fact worked on Andrea's computer and talked to her a few times about it not working well. Leonard said that he got a call from a male who identified himself as an engineer. Leonard believes this man was Andrea's fiancé, James Christopher Johnson. According to Leonard, Johnson called him and offered $5,000 if Leonard could take care of something for him. Johnson then apparently told Leonard to take Andrea's life. He told him when Andrea would be home. Allegedly, Johnson then told Leonard not to use a gun because that would be too loud, that he should wear gloves, that he should not be seen by anyone, and that he should wear a hat to cover his face. He also told Leonard that the $5,000 would be left in the closet for him to pick up. Leonard said that Andrea offered him a root beer when he came to the apartment. He then strangled her until she was no longer breathing. When he went to the closet, the money was not there. In November of 2021, both Leonard and Johnson were charged with the crime. At that point, Leonard was already serving a life sentence for assaulting a 13-year-old girl in 1999. Arlington Police Chief Andy Penn said, "The passage of time does not diminish the need for answers and accountability in this senseless crime that took Andrea's life. The indictments are the culmination of years of dedicated investigative work in our ongoing pursuit of justice on behalf of Andrea and her family." On July 27, 2022, 54-year-old Bobby Joe Leonard pleaded guilty to taking Andrea's life. Johnson is currently under home confinement since his arrest and denies any involvement in what happened. His trial is scheduled to start on September 12, 2022. Mr. Johnson is innocent. His attorneys, Manuel Leva and Frank Salvato, said in a statement. They also said, in prosecuting him, the government is relying on the self-serving lives of a man serving a life sentence for the assault of a 13-year-old girl. Kevin Sinata, Andrea's son, said that he had been surprised that Johnson was a suspect and that the family had supported the man they called Chris back in 1998, when he was first identified as a suspect. On October 18, 1983, a couple gathering wild mushrooms discovered two partially buried human skulls alongside an oak tree close to an abandoned farmhouse in rural Lake Village, Indiana off US 41. After immediately reporting their discovery to authorities, investigators found 4 murder victims at the location. It was determined that each victim had been deceased for several months. All 4 were bound, stabbed, and had their trousers and underwear pulled down around their ankles. The victims were almost immediately linked to Larry Eyler, a serial killer known as the highway or interstate killer. It was believed that several weeks or months had actually elapsed between each of their deaths. Within a couple months, 2 of the victims had been identified via dental records as Michael Bauer and John Bartlett. The 2 remaining victims became known as Brad Doe, Newton County, 1983, and Adam Doe, Newton County, 1983. Eyler would eventually confess to all 4 murders in a statement posthumously released by his attorney Kathleen Zellner following his death due to AIDS-related complications in March 1994 while on death row. His posthumous confession specifically states the 2 victims, unidentified at the time of his death, found at this abandoned farmhouse were the 3rd and 4th victims he had murdered at this location. According to his confession, Adam Doe was a hitchhiker who had agreed to perform a sexual act for $75. Brad Doe was an individual whom Eyler claimed to have been introduced to by his alleged accomplice, Robert Little, at his Terre Haute, Indiana home, but he was unaware of either of their actual identities. In addition, he is known to have disposed of any forms of identification that he would find in his victim's possession. Adam was a black male believed to be between the ages of 15 and 18 or possibly early 20s and had received several dental fillings during his lifetime. The clothing he wore included a distinctive red and black belt inscribed with the word devil multiple times with the buckle containing the word jeans. A pair of jeans and pajama bottoms were also found on his remains along with a pair of boots. The boots were made in the Hush Puppies design and had metal buckles to fasten them on each side. Eyler specifically stated that this murder had been committed in July 1983 and confirmed investigators' suspicions that the victim had been a hitchhiker whom he had lured into his vehicle near Indiana State Road 63 in Terre Haute, Indiana. In his formal confession, Eyler stated that in early or mid-July 1983, following several heated arguments with his boyfriend, John Dobrowolski's, Eyler had driven toward Terre Haute. While traveling on State Road 63, he had encountered a hitchhiker whom he confirmed to be Adam Doe and who he described as being aged in his late teens or early 20s. According to Eyler, he offered this victim $75 to allow Eyler to bind and perform an act upon him, to which the victim contemplated before agreeing. Eyler had given his victim vodka and a sedative and then drove him to the abandoned farmhouse and performed his brutal act. The fourth and final victim was a white male believed to be between 17 and 23 years old. This victim had also received several dental fillings in life and in the years prior to his murder had severely fractured his nose and left ankle. He had 2 homemade tattoos on his right forearm, both of which were moderately preserved and recognizable. One of these tattoos depicted either a crudely inscribed Chinese character or a cross with 2 circular marks. The other was a rectangular or possibly U-shaped marking containing 1 circular mark. The crude nature of these tattoos indicates that he may have spent time in jail, prison, or a juvenile detention center in life. Eyler specifically stated this murder had been committed in either mid or late May 1983. In late 2019, authorities reached out to the DNA Doe Project for assistance with the case. DNA extract was obtained for human identification, and in January of 2021, the DNA was sent to Hudson Alpha Discovery for whole genome sequencing. In March of 2021, bioinformatics work was performed, and a file was produced suitable for upload to genealogical databases. On April 2, 2021, the file was uploaded to GEDmatch. The top match was a close relative, which led to the identification of Brad Doe. In April 2021, nearly 40 years after the remains were found, Brad Doe was formally identified as a 19-year-old Kentucky native named John Ingram Brandenburg Jr., who had disappeared from Chicago in 1983. He was last seen by his family, leaving their home to visit a friend. His loved ones called him Johnny, and he was born February 14, 1964. He was the son of Cleta Louise Brandenburg of Grays, Kentucky, and the late John Ingram Brandenburg, and had several siblings. In Eyler's posthumous confession to Brandenburg's murder, he stated that following a weekend of continual arguing with his lover, he had driven from his lover's home in Greenview, Illinois to Robert Little's Terre Haute residence, where he first encountered his victim. According to Eyler, Little confided to him he had picked this guy up at a location he did not divulge. He was unsure whether Brandenburg and Little had been previously acquainted, although he did observe the two had seemed sort of familiar with each other. Shortly thereafter, Little allegedly persuaded this individual to participate in a sexual act at the abandoned farmhouse where Eyler had earlier murdered Bartlett and Bauer, upon the promise of being paid $100. According to Eyler, as the trio drove to this location, Little informed this individual were looking for something really far out. At this location, the victim was blindfolded and restrained before Little allegedly took several photographs as Eyler removed or adjusted several items of his clothing. According to Eyler, he had to struggle to remove Brandenburg's clothing, as he seemed to know something was wrong prior to stabbing him to death. He said he didn't know as much about Brad Doe as he did Adam Doe. He remembered vivid details about each victim, but not always their names. He said he told his victim to make peace with God, waited a few minutes, and then killed them. The investigation to determine the identity of the sole remaining unidentified individual is still ongoing. Dental records belonging to this decedent are in the possession of investigators, and his DNA is stored within national DNA databases. In July 2020, the DNA Doe Project announced renewed genetic testing efforts to identify Adam Doe. The same website announced their efforts to identify Brad in January 2021, 3 months before his identification. Before his death in 1994, Eyler confessed to over 20 killings of teenage boys and young men between 1982 and 1984 in the Midwestern states while struggling with his homosexuality. Eyler was on death row from the 1984 murder of 15-year-old Danny Bridges at the time of his death. To this day, Adam Doe remains unidentified. On December 26, 1978, authorities uncovered human skeletal remains in the crawlspace of a house in Norwood Park, Illinois, a small community northwest of Chicago. The house belonged to notorious serial killer John Wayne Gasey. The remains were among 26 sets that were found in the crawlspace under Gasey's home. 3 other victims were found buried on his property, and another 4 people whom Gasey admitted killing were found in waterways south of Chicago. Of Gasey's 33 victims, there were 8 that remained unidentified for many years. Of those 8 was 1 victim who was simply labeled victim number 5 because they were the 5th remains to be unearthed. Forensic anthropologists determined that victim number 5 was a white male between 22 and 32 years old. The date of death was most likely between December 1976 and March 15, 1977, based on the location of the remains between 2 other victims who have since been identified. In 2011, the sheriff's office exhumed the remains of the 8 unidentified victims, who had been buried without police knowing who they were. Police were looking for relatives to submit DNA, and so they called on anyone who had a male relative disappear in the Chicago area in the 1970s when Gasey was active. Within weeks, the sheriff's office announced that it had identified 1 set of remains as those of William Bundy, a 19-year-old construction worker. In 2017, a second set was identified as those of 16-year-old Jimmy Hackinson, who disappeared after he called his mother in Minnesota and told her that he was in Chicago. Then in 2019, investigative genetic genealogy was put into place to help identify the remaining unidentified 6 victims. Victim number 5 was ultimately selected as a promising first case. An attached molar was submitted to Astria Forensics in Santa Cruz, California for DNA extraction. The sample was then delivered to Hudson Alpha Discovery in Huntsville, Alabama for whole genome sequencing. Once sequencing was completed, the DNA file was uploaded to GEDmatch, where the talented genetic genealogists were able to identify a potential family of the victim within 8 hours. They compared his DNA profile to those on 2 genealogy websites to find possible relatives and got a hit tied to a second cousin, which led them to a set of shared great-grandparents born in the 19th century. Researchers then worked from those great-grandparents, eliminating descendants who were alive or whose death they could account for. Ultimately, they zeroed in on a young male. That led them to the victim's mother and half-brother, who both provided their DNA for comparison. On October 2021, about 45 years after his murder, it was announced the remains of victim number 5 belonged to Francis Wayne Alexander. Little is known about him, but it is known that he was born in North Carolina, moved to New York where he married, and then moved to Chicago in 1975 where he was soon divorced. Police were able to get a general sense of when he was killed because they knew when the victim who was buried on top of him went missing. Moreover, the fact that the trench in which his body was discovered was dug by Gasey's employee and victim, Gregory Godzik, shortly after the commencement of Godzik's employment at Gasey's contracting firm on or about November 22, 1976, and before Godzik's own murder on December 12, 1976, indicates Alexander's death most likely occurred between November 1976 and March 15, 1977. He would have been 21 or 22 at the time of his death. The last known record of his life were traffic tickets he received, the last one in January 1976. How he crossed paths with one of the most notorious serial killers in American history is a mystery. As authorities say, all they know is that he lived in an area that was frequented by Gasey and where other victims had previously lived. Gasey lured some victims to his house by promising to hire them for construction jobs, but Alexander worked in bars and clubs. His family never filed a missing persons report, and when they lost touch, they figured he'd started a new life and didn't want to be in contact. Still, they loved him, and although news of his murder saddened them, they were relieved to finally know what happened and where he was. He is survived by his mother and 4 half-siblings. As a bonus, the submission of DNA from people who suspected Gasey might have killed their loved ones has helped police solve at least 11 cold cases of homicides that had nothing to do with Gasey. It has also helped families find loved ones who, while missing, were alive, including a man in Oregon who had no idea his family was looking for him. As of today, this leaves 5 remaining unidentified victims of Gasey. The DNA Doe Project is a non-profit that consists of volunteers and is operated by donations to identify Jane and John Does using forensic genealogy. They sell merch on their website and take donations as well if you would like to check it out to support the cause. On July 17, 1992, a farm worker in San Mateo County, California found a woman's body near an irrigation pond. An autopsy showed that the victim passed away due to blunt force trauma from a flat object to the back and left side of her skull. She was identified as 25-year-old Juliet Rivera. Juliet lived in Alameda and worked as a legal secretary. She had been reported missing by her family 10 days before her body was found. Her boyfriend, 50-year-old Abraham Riviera, soon became a suspect. He also went by the name of Gregory Mark Riviera. The Alameda Police Department and San Mateo County Sheriff's detectives questioned Riviera. They noticed numerous inconsistencies with the statement that he had made. They also found other unnamed evidence connecting him to the crime. An arrest warrant was issued for Riviera on August 7, 1992, but by the time they went to arrest him, he was long gone. Detectives found his apartment in Alameda abandoned. Juliet's case was featured on an episode of America's Most Wanted soon after Riviera disappeared. Riviera was added to the website Northern California Most Wanted that is run by the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, aimed at enlisting the public's help in finding individuals wanted by law enforcement. On the website, it said that Riviera has a U.S. Army background and he has auto mechanic experience. He loves to talk about his times in Hawaii and has been described as a person who loved the Bay Area and likes to attend social events and local bars. The breakthrough in the case would finally come in May of 2022. A transient man who was known as John Paul passed away in Merced County, California. A coroner then ran the man's fingerprints in order to locate his next of kin. Results showed that the man was actually Riviera. It turns out the Riviera used his brother's name and lived a transient lifestyle to stay under law enforcement's radar. He and his brother would often swap identities to keep law enforcement guessing. The San Mateo County Sheriff's Office had this to say in a statement. Based on this investigation, with the identity of suspect Abraham Riviera, aka Gregory Mark Riviera, aka John Paul, finally located and now deceased, this case is closed. Public Information Officer Lieutenant Eamon Allen said, "Here at the San Mateo County Sheriff's Office, a cold case does not mean a closed case. We investigate all cases thoroughly. Investigators are hoping that someone will come forward to shed light on why Riviera did what he did. Anyone with additional information pertaining to Juliet Rivera's case is urged to contact the San Mateo County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit at this email address." On the morning of November 13, 1986, the body of 75-year-old Richard Finny was discovered in a living room chair of an East Mission Avenue apartment where he lived by himself in Ontario, California. Money, jewelry, and other miscellaneous items belonging to the victim had been stolen. Knives, fingerprints, and blood belonging to the suspect were located inside Richard's apartment by investigators at the time. The case went cold until technological advances allowed for further examination of the evidence. The case was reopened in 2016. Investigators resubmitted the bloody handprint and a fingerprint found on the knob of a sink inside Richard's home. This time, they found a match. The fingerprint matched that of Nathan Eugene Mathis. Mathis submitted his fingerprints for a job application as a security guard, and that was why investigators had his fingerprints on their database. Mathis was arrested in April 2018 at his home in Ontario in connection with the case. He was 31 years old when the crime took place. In May of 2022, Mathis pleaded guilty. Then, 2 months later, in July, he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Before imposing the stipulated 15 years to life term, San Diego Superior Court Judge Carlos Amores said, "The question as to who did this heinous crime has been answered. The question as to why it was done, and how could somebody do this to someone who was obviously unable to defend himself may never be answered." The workplace holds a significant role in our lives, as it is where we spend the majority of our working hours, gain knowledge, build relationships with colleagues, experience fatigue, and repeat the cycle the next day. While some people cherish their workplace, others may not feel the same way. However, no one desires for it to be the final chapter of their existence. Unfortunately, this became a reality for Sharon Bloom, a 38-year-old woman who mysteriously disappeared from her workplace in Woodbury on November 2, 1989. The circumstances surrounding her vanish and raise perplexing questions. Did she choose to disappear voluntarily, or was there a more sinister force at play? To find answers, we must journey back to where this haunting tale began. Woodbury, located in the eastern part of Minnesota, is a vibrant city known for its family-friendly environment and abundant recreational opportunities. With a population of over 75,000 residents, Woodbury offers a blend of suburban charm and urban amenities. Its esteemed school system and low crime rate contribute to its reputation as a safe and welcoming community for families and professionals alike. That is why it is hard to believe that in 1989, a crime occurred in broad daylight at the heart of this community. November 2nd, 1989 started like any other day in Minnesota. Following her usual routine, Sharon Bloom bid farewell to her leaving boyfriend, David Kofot, and headed to her job at 3M in Woodbury, a mining and manufacturing company, where she worked as a system analyst. Sharon arrived at her workplace at 7:30 am. The day went by without any significant incidents, but as evening approached, David grew increasingly worried when Sharon did not return home in time for dinner at their apartment. After inquiring at her office, David discovered that Sharon had left work around 11:20 am for her lunch break and had not returned. Concerned about Sharon's well-being, he requested the night shift workers to check the parking lot for her Honda automobile. Instantly, David sensed that something was amiss. Throughout the sleepless night, he anxiously awaited Sharon's return, but she never came home. As the morning of November 3rd, 1989 dawned, and Sharon still hadn't appeared, David wasted no time and promptly filed the missing persons report with the Woodbury Police Department. Taking charge of the case, investigator David Hines commenced his investigation with the only clue left behind by Sharon: her car. No evidence was found inside or outside the vehicle, so Hines shifted his focus to the circumstances surrounding Sharon's work environment, which proved to be concerning. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Sharon had been subjected to anonymous hostile pranks at work, including the theft of items from her locked desk. On one occasion, materials she had prepared for an important presentation vanished only to reappear in a different area of her desk after the presentation. 4 sets of keys were stolen from her desk and never recovered. Recently, coffee had been poured on her chair cushion. Sharon confided in her coworkers, expressing genuine fear for her life. Due to this anonymous individual, detectives were well aware that these pranks were not harmless workplace jokes. Someone had deliberately targeted her. The question remained, who and why? Soon enough, detectives obtained a lead when they discovered a crucial detail. On the day Sharon went missing, all her coworkers had returned to the office after lunch, except for Stephen Zanter, who, like Sharon, worked as a systems analyst at 3M. This raised red flags and heightened suspicions regarding Zanter's potential involvement in her disappearance. When questioned, Zanter promptly provided an alibi, but there was a problem. His account of that day did not align with the detective's findings. He stated that he left work shortly after 11:00 am and had lunch at a Burger King in Maplewood. On his way back to work around noon, his car suddenly broke down on a busy street. He claimed to have waited for an unknown period of time until an unidentified passing motorist helped him jumpstart his car. Feeling cold, he decided to go home in Eagan, where he took a bath to warm up. At approximately 2 p.m., he called 3M to inform his supervisor that he would not be returning to work that day. Zanter insisted that he spent the rest of the afternoon at his residence. However, the problem arose when there was no one who could verify his statements. Investigators were unable to locate the passing motorist to corroborate his story. In addition to this questionable alibi, there were other factors that raised suspicions about Zanter. Colleagues informed the detectives that Zanter and Sharon had been friends, but Zanter had shown resentment when Sharon received a promotion while he was overlooked for the same opportunity. This brewing workplace jealousy added a motive that investigators could not ignore. Many believe that Stephen Zanter was fully capable of making Sharon's work life a nightmare. Given his previous questionable actions, one of his co-workers, Tamara House, shared her troubling experiences with investigators. She recalled that Zanter had lent her a computer manual in either 1986 or 1987, but in 1989, she discovered that the manual was missing from the cabinet above her desk. When she confronted Zanter about it, He admitted to taking it without her consent, leaving House understandably angered by his unauthorized intrusion. 8 days into the investigation, David Hines called for reinforcements and Ray Duprem, an agent with the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, was assigned to the case. After reviewing the case file, Duprem's suspicions also turned towards Zanter. On November 12, 1989, 10 days after Sharon's disappearance, Hines and Duprem conducted an interview at Zander's home, with Zander's wife, Barbara, present as well. During the interview, Zander admitted that he was aware of the pranks played on Sharon and acknowledged that some of his co-workers considered him a suspect, but he denied any involvement. He maintained a consistent story regarding the day of Sharon's disappearance. After approximately 3 to 4 hours into the interview, Ray Duprem received a phone call that would change everything. They learned that Sharon's partially clothed body had been discovered by a farmer in a cornfield located in Rice County, between the cities of Northfield and Faribault, Minnesota. It was a tragic scene, as she had been viciously bludgeoned and showed signs of assault. The absence of struggle at the discovery site indicated that the killer likely murdered her elsewhere and then disposed of her body in the field. The detectives decided to inform Zanter about the discovery to observe his reaction. They were taken aback when Zander displayed intense emotional distress. He expressed a desire that Sharon wouldn't be found, but his wife clarified that he meant he hoped she wouldn't be discovered deceased. Zander's emotional state escalated, and he eventually curled into a fetal position on the floor, sobbing and moaning. Concerned for his well-being, his wife requested the officers to leave. As they were preparing to depart, Zander made a troubling remark, asking if they were going to take him to jail. Detective Hines inquired if there was a specific reason for them to do so, but Zanter didn't provide a direct answer. His peculiar behavior only deepened the detective's suspicions, although blood and hair samples were collected from Zanter, and arrests could be made due to the lack of direct evidence. The investigation suffered a significant setback when the autopsy results were revealed. Unfortunately, the biological material collected from Sharon Bloom's body did not turn out to be semen as initially suspected. Furthermore, the 2 hair samples found at the dump site did not match Sharon's hair. Although microscopic analysis indicated some similarity to Steven Zander's hair, there is not enough conclusive evidence to link him to the crime. As time went on, the investigation came to a standstill due to a lack of viable leads. However, the potential breakthrough seemed to be on the horizon more than 2 years after Sharon's murder. In February 1992, Agent Duprem interviewed several of Barbara Zanter's co-workers. Joe Sorensen, one of Barbara's colleagues at Woodland Elementary School, recalled that on November 3, 1989, the day after Sharon Bloom disappeared, Barbara seemed distracted at work. She mentioned discovering fresh blood stains on the carpet and walls of her new home from the previous day and sought advice from her co-workers on how to remove them. Barbara explained that her husband had accidentally cut himself, causing the blood trail to extend across the new carpet, the stairs, and into the bathroom on the 2nd floor. Detective Duprem asked Sorensen if she would be willing to record conversations with Barbara, to which she agreed. Joe arranged a meeting with a few co-workers at Barbara's house, and everyone except Barbara was aware that the conversation was being recorded. Sorensen believed that Barbara was in a state of denial about the situation, as she was unwilling to accept the idea that her husband could be capable of murder. Armed with this new information, a search warrant was authorized on March 4, 1992, and the following day, law enforcement conducted a search of Steven Zander's home. The presence of blood throughout the 2nd floor was confirmed through luminal tests. During the search, the police seized a set of keys that were discovered in the bottom drawer of a dresser located in the basement. These keys were definitively identified as belonging to Sharon. In Zanter's briefcase, the police also found numerous explicit photographs, including some featuring women in bathing suits and others depicting women sitting on the toilet. On October 23, 1992, Steven Zanter was indicted by the Rice County Grand Jury for the murder of Sharon Bloom. However, the case was far from resolved. Following a lengthy hearing on August 12, 1993, the trial court suppressed several items obtained during the 3 searches, including the photographs and Bloom's keys. The court ruled that the police only had probable cause to seize the blood evidence, but not the keys and photographs. Furthermore, The source of the blood found in Xanthra's home could not be determined, leaving no physical evidence to link him to the murder. Reluctantly, Rice County prosecutors decided not to pursue the charges to avoid the risk of potential acquittal, allowing Xanthar to remain a free man. Once again, the case went cold. In the late 1990s, DNA technology advanced rapidly, and by 1999, the introduction of STR-DNA analysis revitalized cold cases. Through this method, DNA traces were identified in cases where they had previously been undetectable. In March 1999, Amory Gross, a forensic scientist at Minnesota's BCA Crime Lab, conducted further testing on the blood-soaked carpet. This time, the results conclusively matched the blood to Sharon Bloom's DNA. Additionally, hair samples collected from the dump site were found to match Stephen Xanthar's mitochondrial DNA. Based on the compelling forensic evidence, Stephen Xanthar was once again charged with murder. This time, realizing that the state had a strong case against him, he chose to plead guilty. In April 2003, after a span of 14 years since Sharon's tragic murder, Stephen Xanthar, a 47-year-old individual, made a public confession for the very first time. Xanthar acknowledged that on November 2, 1989, Sharon had visited his residence, where she confronted him regarding the torment she had endured at her workplace. In a fit of rage, Xanthar brutally struck Sharon on the head multiple times with a hammer. Following the heinous act, Xanthar concealed her lifeless body in the basement of his home. Later that night, he disposed of her remains in a remote cornfield located in Rice County. The discovery of Sharon's body occurred several days later. However, Xanthar claimed to have no recollection of the precise steps he took to clean up the blood-stained crime seen in his home before his wife and daughter returned. Consequently, in June 2003, Stephen Xanthar, aged 47, received a 25-year prison sentence at Minnesota's Stillwater Penitentiary. The peaceful city of Ottawa, located in Canada, was shaken by a gruesome crime that occurred on May 3, 1975. The body of a woman, later known as the Nation River Lady, was discovered floating in the nearby Nation River. The detectives who arrived at the scene immediately recognized the signs of a horrifying homicide. Despite their best efforts, they struggled to uncover any substantial clues or evidence that could help identify the victim. As time passed, the case seemed destined to remain an unsolved mystery. However, advancements in technology decades later provided a glimmer of hope for a new generation of detectives. They embarked on a mission to unravel the identity of the Nation River Lady and uncover the truth behind her tragic fate. How did this woman end up in such a horrific condition in the river? The city of Ottawa, known as the cultural and diverse center, boasts of numerous national museums, renowned art galleries, and vibrant annual festivals. It is widely regarded as one of the best places to live in Canada, offering a high level of safety and well-being for its citizens. In fact, Ottawa is recognized as one of the safest cities in the country according to the Crime Severity Index, with a crime rate significantly lower than the national average. However, the heinous crime that occurred in 1975 challenged this reputation, leaving detectives perplexed for years. On that fateful day, a farmer stumbled upon the lifeless body of a woman floating in the Nation River near a bridge crossing on Highway 417, just 60 kilometers east of Ottawa, Ontario. Witnesses immediately alerted the Ontario Provincial Police, who swiftly arrived at the scene and recovered the body. An intensive investigation was launched to uncover the truth. It was determined that the remains had likely been in the waters since either the previous fall or early spring of that year. The body had been tightly wrapped in various pieces of cloth, towels, and rags, with the hands and feet bound using neckties. The investigators determined that the woman had been strangled to death using a television cable wire before being disposed of in the water. An examination of the remains revealed that she was estimated to be between 25 and 50 years old, had dyed reddish-blonde hair, and painted her fingernails and toenails pink. Despite numerous efforts to identify her, the investigators were unsuccessful. Consequently, she was designated as a Jane Doe and became widely known as the Nation River Lady. The detectives diligently investigated the case and scrutinized the evidence, but their efforts always reached a dead end. As a result, the investigation lost momentum and eventually went cold. In 2017, the Ontario Provincial Police reopened the Nation River Lady case and approached it from a fresh perspective. Collaborating with the Forensics Department, they created a 3D reconstruction of the victim, believing it would accurately depict her appearance. Over the following years, the police attempted to identify her using this 3D model, but their endeavors proved fruitless. Nevertheless, the detectives refused to give up on the case. In 2019, the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto obtained a new DNA profile of the victim. This DNA data was then sent to a laboratory in California, where it matched samples collected from 2 individuals listed in a family DNA tree. The detectives also collaborated closely with the DNA Doe Project, an organization dedicated to identifying victims in cold cases. In 2020, the organization uploaded the victim's DNA profile to genetic genealogy databases, leading to a breakthrough in the case. The DNA profile for the Nation River Lady was established and uploaded to the genetic genealogy databases at GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. After weeks of searching for matches on various sites and conducting a thorough investigation of the available records, the genetic genealogists at DNA Doe Project successfully identified Jewel Parchman-Lanford as a potential match. It was discovered that Jewel had gone missing around the same time the body of the Nation River Lady was found. Despite extensive efforts, Jewel was never located. Decades later, detectives began to suspect a connection between the 2 crimes and believe that the unidentified woman was, in fact, Jewel Parchman-Lanford. Born on March 30, 1927, in Tennessee, USA to parents Little Mitchell Parchman and Egla Mae Wilson. Jewel was the eldest of 5 siblings and was deeply loved and respected by her family. She grew up to become a well-known businesswoman in Jackson, Tennessee, where she owned the Jackson Health Club and Imperial Health Spa alongside her then-husband, Atlas Lanford, during the early 70s. Described as kind-hearted and down-to-earth, Jewel had a special bond with her niece, Denise Chung, despite not having any children of their own. Unfortunately, Jewel's marriage to Atlas faced difficulties, leading to their divorce in the mid-70s. Shortly after, Jewel met Rodney Nichols, a Canadian man, during his visit to the U.S. The 2 quickly formed a strong connection, prompting Jewel to make the decision to accompany Rodney to Montreal, Canada, where they planned to live together. Tragically, in June 1975, Jewel Parchman-Lanford was reported missing by her family in Montreal, marking the last known whereabouts of the 48-year-old woman. When Jewel's family was unable to reach her for an extended period of time, one of her relatives made the journey to Montreal in search of her. However, despite their efforts, Jewel could not be located, prompting the family member to contact the Montreal police for assistance. A concerned relative informed the authorities that they had not heard from Jewel since April 1975 and expressed their worries about her well-being. In June 1975, Jewel's brother, Ronald Parchman, also reached out to the Montreal police, but unfortunately he returned home empty-handed, with no information about Jewel except for her Cadillac, which he brought back. It wasn't until August of 1975 that an official missing persons report was filed for Jewel. Once she was officially listed as missing, the Service de Police de la Ville de Montreal, also known as the SPVN, initiated an investigation into her disappearance. As part of their efforts, the detectives notified the media and other police forces about Jewel's case, hoping that someone who knew her might have information about her whereabouts. Although the detectives were able to establish a connection between Jewel's case and the Nation River Lady case in 2020, there was also investigation into Jewel's disappearance when she initially went missing in 1975. Just before her disappearance, Jewel had been residing with Rodney in his Montreal residence, making him a person of interest in the investigation. Rodney was brought in for questioning, but unfortunately, no valuable information was obtained from the interrogation. Following Jewel's mysterious banishing in 1975, Rodney continued to utilize her Cadillac for personal use. During that time, Rodney was actively involved with the Westmount Rugby Club, where he held the position of team captain for several years. In order to gain further insight into Rodney's background, the detectives decided to conduct a thorough background check. This investigation revealed that Rodney was born in Middleton, Nova Scotia in 1942 to a Canadian couple who were stationed in the United Kingdom during the Second World War. In 1961, Rodney himself joined the British Army. According to a spokesperson from the UK Ministry of Defence, Rodney served in the Wessex Brigade for approximately 1 year but did not complete his training. Upon investigating his background, no suspicious information was found. Since there was no evidence linking him to Jules' disappearance, the police released him from suspicion. Despite extensive efforts to locate Jules, she was never found. The detectives found no leads to pursue. There were no reported sightings of her, and her bank account showed no signs of any financial activity. The police concluded that she had vanished without a trace, resulting in the case of Jules' mysterious disappearance going cold. Several years after Jules Lanford disappeared, she was officially declared dead in her hometown of Jackson, USA. Her family held a memorial service for her and laid her to rest in Highland Memorial Gardens, with a headstone bearing the inscription, "Missing but not forgotten." With a thorough examination of Jules' case, the detectives knew their next steps. They contacted Denise Parkman Chung, one of Jules' beloved nieces, and other family members, requesting their DNA samples to potentially solve this decades-old mystery. The family willingly provided their DNA samples, which were then sent for testing. Finally, in 2020, after 45 years, the body found in the Nation River, Ottawa, in 1975 was identified. The woman, known as the Nation River Lady for decades, turned out to be Jules Parkman Lanford herself, the woman reported missing in Montreal in 1975. While DNA genealogy analysis had been successfully used in the United States to solve cold cases and identify unidentified remains for several years, this was the first time it was employed in Canada. The results of this technique were not only significant for Canada's law enforcement team, but also provided hope for solving numerous other cold cases. Jules' case presented a unique scenario, as it involved both an unsolved murder and an unidentified victim, showcasing the intriguing application of DNA genealogy technology. The majority of Jules' immediate family, including her siblings and parents, had long passed away. However, her mother, during her lifetime, tirelessly advocated for Jules' case. She persistently reached out to the FBI for updates from the Ontario Provincial Police in Canada, fighting for her daughter until her final moments in 1996. Denise, Jules' niece, had no knowledge that the detectives were still actively investigating her missing aunt until she was approached to provide a DNA sample for testing. In 2022, the investigators apprehended Rodney Nichols, an 81-year-old residing in an assisted living center in Hollywood, Florida, USA, as the perpetrator of Jules' murder. Extradition proceedings were initiated against him. Nevertheless, the investigators refrained from disclosing the details surrounding Rodney's AV crime and the motive behind it. They believed that prematurely revealing developments in the investigation could compromise the case and subsequent legal proceedings, including potential extradition from the United States. Consequently, all progress in the case remained confidential until the Ontario Provincial Police issued an official statement. In September 2022, Rodney was formally charged at the Ontario Court of Justice in L'Original, Canada. When questioned about the absence of a connection between Jules' disappearance and the unidentified Nation River Lady, the detectives explained that establishing such a link was challenging at the time the crimes occurred due to the absence of DNA analysis techniques. Additionally, the involvement of two separate jurisdictions in different provinces further complicated matters, as the means of sharing information between police departments and regions were limited to telephone, fax, or mail. Former investigators who previously worked on the case believed that if they had connected the discovery of the unidentified woman's body with Jules' disappearance back in 1975, the investigation would have had a significantly higher chance of success. Henry Rosenblatt, an acquaintance of Rodney, described him as an enjoyable individual to be around. He mentioned that Rodney was entertaining and had a vibrant social life. Henry recalled meeting Jules a few times during the 1970s. According to Henry, Rodney introduced Jules to him as his romantic partner. When Henry and some other friends inquired about Jules' absence after a while, Rodney informed them that she had left him and he had no knowledge of her whereabouts. Henry was shocked when he heard the news of Rodney's arrest for Jules' murder. Despite spending a considerable amount of time with them over the years, he had no inkling that Rodney was capable of such a heinous act. To Henry, the entire situation seemed completely out of character for Rodney. Finally, all of Jules' surviving family members found solace. In March 2022, Jules' remains were brought back to the United States with the assistance of Highland Memorial Gardens and George J. Smith and Sons Funeral Home. The family held a small ceremony and laid Jules' ashes to rest. Her headstone bore the inscription, "Finally home and at peace." The family was grateful to have Jules' ashes returned, and now that she was back home, they could peacefully move forward, cherishing Jules' memory forever. Danae's Jules' niece was quite young when her aunt went missing in 1975, but she still held fond memories of her and shared them with the detectives. Dennis described Jules as a joyful and compassionate person who always lent a helping hand to her community. Jules took care of herself and ensured the well-being of her loved ones. She had a vibrant personality and a deep love for traveling. Dennis vividly remembered the times when Jules would take her shopping and buy her anything she desired. Dennis and her father, who happened to be Jules' brother, provided assistance to Jules and Addis, who was Jules' ex-husband during the construction of their house, frequently visited the house to spend quality time with her beloved aunt. However, when Jules departed for Montreal, Dennis was left in a state of anguish. As she grew older, she was eventually informed about her aunt's sudden disappearance, which deeply shattered her heart. Nevertheless, gaining knowledge about what had transpired with her aunt brought Dennis a sense of closure. The current situation regarding Roney's potential arrest remains uncertain. Both the American and Canadian Departments of Justice have refrained from confirming whether an extradition hearing date for Roney has been established, citing confidentiality. Consequently, Jules' family, who have been patiently waiting for the past 48 years, will continue to seek further information and closure regarding Jules' untimely demise, although they find solace in finally knowing the truth about Jules' fate. They firmly believe that true closure can only be achieved once Rodney is incarcerated and facing the consequences of his actions. If the cases had been linked earlier, do you believe Rodney would have been apprehended much earlier? What could have driven Rodney to commit the heinous act of killing Jules? What circumstances do you think might have unfolded between them that led Rodney down this path of sin? At the age of 16, Jennifer Pratt was described as outgoing and popular with dreams of becoming a model when she grew up and went by Jenny. She was a 10th grader in Carlsbad, California, and began dating a man named Curtis Croft who said he was 17. However, she would hide this relationship from her parents for several months. They would eventually figure out that he was not actually 17 and was 24 years old instead. Not only that, but Curtis had also been in jail for drugs and was described as a bad boy who drove a Porsche and was a surfer. On April 25, 1987, after hanging out for several hours, Curtis went to bring Jeannie home before her midnight curfew. The two set off on a motorcycle, which he borrowed from a friend, with Jeannie sitting on the back holding onto him when the two approached a red light in the turning lane. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a light-colored pickup truck carrying several young men in the bed of the truck drove by and hit Jeannie in the back of her head with a 2x4. She immediately went unconscious and the unidentified culprit sped off laughing. She had to be airlifted to the hospital and had sustained significant brain damage, leaving her in a coma for 3 months. After she surprisingly woke up from her coma, she had no memory of the attack, and it was apparent that she now had severe physical and mental functioning problems. At first, she seemed incapable of thought or action, but after 12 weeks, she started physical therapy. 7 months later, Jeannie began to speak, and a year later, she learned to walk again. Sadly, her mental and physical disabilities will remain with her for the rest of her life. Curtis Croft was interviewed more than once, and strangely, his story changed more than once. He told them he didn't get the chance to identify the attackers, as they were going 55 miles per hour, but authorities immediately suspected Curtis of lying about what he knows. He would eventually provide them with some names, but would later say he felt threatened and pressured and just gave them names, including one name from someone he had an argument with the night before. However, he said he did not know if the people that he named were really involved. To test his statement about the truck going 55 miles per hour and him not being able to see the occupants of the truck, tests were done using mannequins on a motorcycle. After the actual attack, the board found at the scene was only a few feet from the spot where Jeannie was attacked. A mock test was done using reconstructions of the attack at 55 miles per hour versus 10 miles per hour. In the 55-mile-an-hour reconstruction, the board swung by the assailant fell about 50 feet from the scene of the crime. The second reconstruction played out at only 10 miles an hour. This time, the mannequins sustained injuries very similar to the ones Curtis and Jeannie actually received, and the board fell right next to the motorcycle. Authorities said that if the truck was moving 55 miles per hour, that Jeannie and Curtis would have been killed instantly, proving Curtis lied. In 1985, 2 years prior to the incident, Curtis was caught selling cocaine to a DEA agent. By cooperating with the police, he had served less than half of his sentence, leading to him being known as a snitch. This led to the belief that other drug dealers then attempted to have him killed but missed and hit Jeannie. Jeannie's parents hired a private investigator who interviewed students at Jeannie's high school, and based on the evidence and interviews, he concluded that Curtis was the target of the incident, not Jeannie. Police believed that Curtis did in fact see those people and lied about how fast they were going and not being able to recognize them. Curtis continually told police that he had been threatened not to talk about the case and was afraid of being killed. He admitted to police that he had indeed informed on other drug dealers. In 2010, Curtis became popular on battlecam.com, which is a social media where people broadcast via their webcam. He would often perform immature stunts and bizarre acts, even sustaining injuries at times. He reportedly bragged about having a lot of women and weed despite being about 50 years old at that point. At one point, he videoed himself with 2 garbage bags full of marijuana that he grew and was later arrested because of it. Rogue area drug enforcement agents raided his property in Grants Pass, Oregon in 2013 after Google Earth images helped authorities track down his marijuana garden, in which he was allegedly growing more plants than he had authorization for. Huffington Post reports that he was caught with 94 pot plants despite registration to grow only 30. As of today, no one has been charged in the attack and the case remains unsolved. Alyssa Angelique McLemore was born July 23, 1987. She is a member of the Aleut tribe and described as fun-loving and enjoyed dancing and roller skating. At the age of 21, she lived with her mother and grandmother in Kent, Washington, along with her 3-year-old daughter. Sadly, her mother Gasey was losing her battle with scleroderma, a severe autoimmune disorder. Alyssa took care of her mother and the two were very close. On the evening of April 9, 2009, Alyssa's grandmother, Barbara, called Alyssa to tell her that her mother's condition had taken a turn for the worse. She told her grandmother that she was going to head to the hospital to be with her mother, but she would never make it. Hours later, a call came in to 911 from a young woman frantically asking for help before the call was disconnected. Before the 10-second call disconnected, a man could be heard in the background saying, "I'll hurt you." They could not trace her cell phone because her BlackBerry did not have a GPS sensor, but authorities stated they believed the call came from the Kent region. The caller was later determined to be Alyssa, and her phone would go out of service a few days later. Earlier in the day, a couple of witnesses said they saw her approached by a man in a green 1990s model pickup truck with an out-of-state license plate, possibly Oregon, near Kent Des Moines Road and 30th Avenue South on Kent's West Hill. The witnesses stated that it appeared they may have known each other. It's also of note that the area she was seen in is a city area of Taunton with lots of prostitution activity. The driver of the green truck was described as white in his 50s or 60s, but it is unclear if he had anything to do with her disappearance. Sadly, her mom passed away 3 days later. Her grandmother then moved to Auburn, Washington following Alyssa's disappearance and Gracie's death. Alyssa's aunt, Tina, has been heavily involved in trying to keep Alyssa's name and disappearance in the public's attention. However, due to her history of sex work, her case has received little coverage. As of today, Alyssa has never been found and this case remains unsolved. Michael Josephon is a 5-year-old boy nicknamed MJ and Monkey, born to parents Tyler and Brandy from Fruitland, Idaho. On July 27, 2021, He spent the day with his family at the park before his mother went to work. That evening, little Michael was home with his father and younger sister on Southwest 9th Street in Fruitland while his mother was at work. He was last seen in the area of his home in South Arizona Avenue about 6:30 p.m. that evening, wearing a blue Minecraft t-shirt, dark blue boxer briefs, and flip-flops. Apparently, while Michael's father was busy ordering pizza and changing his daughter's diaper, Michael went next door and asked the neighbor if he could play with their kids. The neighbor said no and watched Michael walk back towards his home. This was the last reported sighting of him, and he has never been seen again. Large searches have taken place multiple times, including the draining of nearby irrigation ditches, as well as a search of the nearby Snake River. Fruitland Police Chief J.D. Hoff previously stated no Amber Alert was issued because not enough information was known, including whether there was a suspect or suspect vehicle. Police have searched Michael's home at least 4 times and also brought in dogs, but Michael's scent could not be found. This could be due to the amount of people that entered the house around the time he went missing. The search for Michael has involved more than a dozen law enforcement agencies, canine units, dive teams, paragliders, and drones. Fruitland police are still wanting to speak to 4 citizens seen in the area around the same time he went missing. One is the driver of a white 2016 to 2020 Honda Pilot seen on surveillance camera at 6:47 p.m., leaving the area where he went missing, and also a blue Dodge Avenger model year 2010 to 2011. Police would also like to speak to a man who was jogging on the sidewalk on Southwest 8th Street near Crestview Park around 6:15 p.m. He had dark hair, facial hair, dark shorts, and no shirt. They are also looking to identify an adult male with dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt and black shorts, seen walking off of Southwest 8th Street, around the park area and the splash pad, towards the lower drainage behind the neighborhoods. There have been nearly 600 tips come in that have been investigated but have not resulted in finding Michael. Officials have said his parents remain fully cooperative and have complied with all requests of investigators who have worked tirelessly to find him. A reward established for information leading to Michael's safe return has increased to over $50,000 and is available until March 31, 2022. It is feared that Michael was abducted due to not being found in the area after so many searches. His family remains broken without Michael, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Charles Arlen Leon Henderson was born March 16, 1980, and went by Arlen. His mother describes him as a fun-loving boy who enjoyed telling stories, swimming, diving, and bike riding. Sadly, his father died of emphysema in 1990 when Arlen was only 10 years old and he lived with his mother Debbie. On July 25, 1991, at the age of 11, Arlen was riding his white and yellow Huffy White Lightning bicycle in the trailer park he lived at in Moscow Mills, Missouri. His friend Justin came over and the two hung out before going to Justin's home to play, and then Arlen returned. Later, he told Deborah that he was going to go out and look for his friends to play with. His mom checked on him at 4:30 and he was still outside playing. The last thing he said to her was, "Save me some Polish sausage, Mom." He was last seen between 5 and 5:30 p.m. on his bike. Between 6 and 6:30 p.m., Arlen's friends came over to his house to look for him, and Deborah assumed he was still playing outside with his friends. But when they said they hadn't seen him since earlier that day, she knew something was wrong. Turns out Arlen had disappeared and has never been seen again. Despite searches conducted by the police, no trace of Arlen was found. His bicycle would eventually be found in a bean field on North Ethlyn Road nearly 3 months after his disappearance and was taken by the police as evidence and for fingerprint retrieval. In 2001, 10 years later, Joshua Spangler would confess to murdering Arlen. Spangler was 13 years old at the time of the alleged killing and was apparently involved in drug activity in 1991. He was allegedly selling drugs for his older brothers George and Charles Gibson. Charles is currently serving a 30-year sentence in a federal prison for running a meth operation. Both of the Gibson brothers were initially charged in connection with Arlen's case in the spring of 2001. Spangler told investigators that a member of Arlen's family owed money to Charles, and Spangler was paid $10,000 to kill Arlen as a warning. Spangler stated that he was riding in a truck with George on July 25, 1991, the day Arlen vanished, and they abducted him and held him in a house in Davis, Missouri for a few days. He claimed he shot Arlen with a 9mm pistol in a creek bed near Davis on July 28, 3 days after his abduction, and buried the body along the Mississippi River. Investigators searched a site near Winfield, Missouri in the summer of 2001 for Arlen's remains, but nothing was found. Authorities withdrew charges against both of the Gibsons in October 2001 after learning that Spangler lied regarding their involvement in the crime. Citing numerous discrepancies in Spangler's account, they charged him with perjury and connection with his testimony about Arlen's supposed death. Spangler is described as being a compulsive liar, wanting attention, and had it out for his brothers for unknown reasons. Those who know him say that he believed that since he was only 13 at the time of the alleged murder, that he would suffer less punishment, but his brothers would get more punishment. Spangler pleaded guilty to perjury and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. At the time of his plea, he was serving a 4-year prison sentence for unrelated charges of burglary and evidence tampering. Authorities now believe Spangler and the Gibsons had nothing to do with Arlen's disappearance and made up the story as a malicious joke to make the police look incompetent. Authorities have not cast aside the theory that Arlen's disappearance may have been drug-related, but his mother denies allegations that she or any of her family members were involved with drugs. In 2007, investigators began investigating Michael Devlin for possible involvement in Arlen's disappearance and in several other cases. Sean Hornbeck, a 15-year-old boy who disappeared at age 11 in 2002, and William Van Omby, a 13-year-old boy who was abducted in 2007, were both found alive in Devlin's 450-square-foot apartment on South Holmes Avenue in Kirkwood, Missouri in January 2007. Van had been missing for 5 days and Sean for over 4 years. Both boys had been held against their will by Devlin, who pleaded guilty to kidnapping and child molestation and was sentenced to 74 life sentences in prison. Authorities initially suspected Devlin could be linked to other missing child cases, and a task force was created to investigate that theory. However, the task force dissolved in 2007 as it could not find any evidence that Devlin was involved in any other children's disappearances. In 2007, someone who claimed to know Devlin provided detectives photos of a teenaged boy that appeared about 17 years old, which is how old Arlen would have been in 1997 when the pictures were allegedly taken. When the photo was shown to Debbie, she said the boy did resemble her son, but there was no way of knowing that it was for sure him. Years later, a Canadian man came forward and said at the age of 14, he traveled to Illinois in 1998. He said while walking back from a video rental store, a man in a pickup truck tried to get him to accept a ride. He said the man became irritated when he declined, and he never forgot the man's face. He said he filed a police report and nearly forgot about it until he began volunteering for a nonprofit in Canada called Operation Underground Railroad that works to combat human trafficking. He said he was scrolling through stories on YouTube about children who'd been abducted and were able to escape later. That's when he said he came across a story on Sean Hornbeck, and he says he saw a photo of Michael Devlin. He said he immediately knew that that was the man that he encountered that day. Sadly, Arlen's sister was murdered 10 years after his disappearance by her estranged husband, who subsequently committed suicide. Arlen's mother still lives in the same trailer park where her son used to live, but in a different mobile home. Her husband's name is still listed in the phone book in case Arlen decides to call home. As of today, Arlen has not been located, and this case remains unsolved. Rebecca Lee Reed was born in May of 1987 and went by Becca. She is described as very sweet, but vulnerable due to being mentally challenged. On May 24, 2020 at 4 p.m., 32-year-old Becca disappeared from her yard at 201 Leetown Road in Lumberton, Mississippi. She allegedly told her sister Veda and family friend Thomas that she was thinking of taking a walk to a farm that her father worked at, which was about 1.5 miles away. However, she never arrived at the farm and would go missing. Upon investigation, there was no indication that she even attempted the walk. Family members say that Becca suffers from a medical condition that could affect her judgment, but they don't believe that she would have gotten into a vehicle with someone she was not comfortable with or someone she did not know. A resident in the area reported seeing a white SUV, possibly a 2002 Chevrolet Trailblazer, in the area on the day and around the time she went missing. Becca suffers from severe diabetes and asthma and has to take medications several times a day, and these medications were left behind at her home. When she was last seen, she was wearing a faded pink or red shirt, black sweatpants, black diabetic shoes, and a tan or brown Carhartt jacket. Her family hopes that someone will call the Anonymous Crime Stoppers tip line or even use the Anonymous Crime Stoppers app online. A silver alert was issued after her disappearance and little information is available in her case. As of today, Becca has not been located and this case remains unsolved. Russell Sigurd Evans was born on July 22, 1975 to John and Susan Evans. He lived in Spokane, Washington and was an 8th grader at Libby Middle School and excelled in basketball. At only 13 years old, Russell was already 6 feet 3 inches and was described as popular and an all-around good kid with a good sense of humor. On the night of June 3, 1989, 13-year-old Russell was hanging out at Thornton Murphy Park near 28th and Ray Street with 7 of his friends including Brian Bushing, Don Hepburn, his best friend Aaron Abrison, and others. This is when Aaron and 2 foster brothers, aged 15 and 17, got into an argument because one of the boys approached Aaron's girlfriend, Dawn, and asked for her phone number. An argument ensued and turned into shoving until Russell intervened. The 2 brothers left the park and said they were going to get their homeboys because they were outnumbered. Russell then spent the rest of the evening at Aaron's house until he left around midnight after calling his father and telling him that he was heading home, which was 2 miles away. Soon after he ran into his friend, said Madison, and Russell was telling him about the incident earlier at the park. Said recalled Russell being hyped up about the incident, but did not appear to be in fear of retaliation. The 2 departed ways at 29th Avenue and Freya Street, and Russell continued jogging north towards his home, a mile away at this point. About 30 minutes later, at 1:05 a.m., a woman named Sandy Ferris, along with another woman, came upon Russell lying in the northbound lane of South Thor Street, along an incline referred in the media as either Thorray Hill or South Hill, just 2 blocks from his home. While passerby Sandy waited with Russell for help, she tried to keep him still and asked him what happened. However, he just kept yelling out for his friend Brian. While Russell was being placed in the ambulance, Sandy noticed a teenager in white shorts and a white t-shirt watching the scene from a nearby grassy knoll and then running up the hill. Sandy tried to get the officers' attention, but they just asked her to step away and didn't address the issue, which was a vital mistake. Later, one of the EMS workers reported seeing the boy dressed in white running away as well. He was taken to Sacred Heart Medical Center where he sadly passed away hours later. The police ruled that he had died after being struck by a vehicle, most likely a truck. Authorities believe that minutes after beginning his walk home, Russell was struck from behind by an unknown vehicle, possibly a pickup truck. However, after viewing his body, his family did not believe that his death was a hit-and-run accident. They noticed finger bruises on his face, nose, and upper arms, which led them to strongly believe he had been held down. He also had bruises on his knuckles, again proof that he had been in a fight. Also, his shoes and shoelaces were found downhill, meaning he would have had to been struck by a vehicle while walking uphill, which was the opposite direction of his home. Strangely, his shoelaces actually separated from his shoes. 3 pools of blood were found about 50 feet away from his body. The pools of blood did not make sense to his parents since he had supposedly been thrown far away from where they were found. In the police report, they failed to document where his body was found. Eyewitness Sandy later helped his parents determine where she found the body. His parents believed that a person hit by a vehicle and are subsequently separated from their shoes by the impact would not have blood on the shoelaces. However, strangely Russell's shoelaces did, leading them to believe he wasn't struck by a vehicle like initially thought. Also, there were no drag marks on his body. His parents believed he was most likely attacked with a weapon such as a bat or a 2x4 by more than one person while being held. However, a forensic pathologist agreed with police, believing that Russell was struck in the back by a vehicle bumper, knocking him out of his shoes. Overall, he felt that the injuries were consistent with an accident, and his official cause of death was a severe blow to the back, which lacerated his kidney and broke his spine. His parents, a registered nurse and a cardiopulmonary technologist, then hired a second pathologist who determined that he had been in a fight prior to his death. The irregular bruising found on his back appeared to be inconsistent with only a hit and run. His parents also believed his friend Brian might have been at the scene. However, when Russell's father talked with Brian, he denied any knowledge of this, although he did state that he was wearing white shorts that night. Interestingly, when Russell's mother arrived at the hospital, a nurse said someone named Brian had called asking about Russell's condition. It is unknown how Brian would have known that Russell was rushed to the ER if he hadn't been at the scene. Also, Brian later changed his story when questioned by the police, telling them that he didn't even own white shorts and a white shirt. One theory is that Brian was being threatened to keep quiet about the murder and the case went cold. Brian and his family moved to Ohio within a year of the murder. Interestingly, the day after his death, Dawn Hepburn told Saeed's mother, a school bus driver, that the day before the incident, she saw a note given to Russell which read, "You'd better watch your back." If this is true, the incident could have involved suspects besides the ones at the park. Due to rumors of their involvement, the two foster brothers from the park incident volunteered to take polygraph tests and said that they passed. But years later, a private investigator hired by the Evans family uncovered rumors that they bragged about taking muscle relaxants before the test to influence the results. Since they passed the polygraph, the police allegedly never verified their alibis. The two were arrested on charges of stealing and selling electronic equipment about 2 weeks before Russell's death. In 1992, the Evans won a court case which gained them access to all the reports in their son's investigation. After reviewing the reports, this increased their beliefs that the case had been mishandled and Russell died from more than just a hit and run. Here are the reasons Russell's parents feel that the authorities mishandled the case. Officers didn't photograph Russell or the scene and didn't chalk mark where his body was found. No samples of blood spots on the pavement, some of which may have belonged to individuals other than Russell, were taken. Police never interviewed Sandy Ferris about Russell's comments to her after she found him lying in the road. Russell was walking downhill on a one-way road at the time he was struck. Why then were his shoes found 86 feet downhill from him? Also, there was no road rash or lacerations, which would have been commonly found on someone after being hit by a vehicle at a high rate of speed. The blood pools were also downhill from his body. The blow that caused Russell's death hit him 46 inches off the ground, more than twice the height of the average car bumper. There was also evidence that Russell may have been restrained at one point due to bruising on his biceps. Russell's socks were never recovered. His father believes that they were intentionally discarded at some point due to the fact that they would have been soaked with blood, thereby proving that Russell had been in a fight. Police contend that the socks may have been discarded in the emergency room. According to Sandy Ferris, she noticed Russell's were at the scene when she found him. No one believes that the EMTs would have picked up his socks off the road and placed them in the ambulance with him. No interviews were conducted with Saeed Madison, the last person to see Russell Evans alive, or with Sandy Ferris that found him that night, who has sadly since passed away. The private investigator, Sandy Brewer, located 5 people who claimed they heard one of the boys boast about his involvement in Russell's death. Another witness said a gang of youths known as the School Boys or the GQ Gang, which stands for Gangster Quality, assaulted Russell with a bat, then ran over him with a car. The PI also came forward with recorded conversations with someone who said that someone admitted to them the day after the murder that he indeed killed Russell. He had told this person that he had accidentally killed that boy last night, that he had went too far and that he had screwed up. He said he hit him, backed up, and ran over him. His friends agreed that they would give him an alibi if police came to them. The PI handed over this information to police, but it's unknown if they ever investigated the recordings. After receiving information from the police reports and hiring a private investigator, the Evans constructed their own belief of the events that led to their son's death. They theorized that while Russell was on his way home, that a vehicle approached them at a high rate of speed and he was hit with a bat or 2x4, striking him in the back. Then the vehicle stopped in front of Russell, forcing him to turn and go back up the hill, but was restrained by the assailants who beat him. However, despite the new witnesses coming forward, the police continued to insist it was only a hit-and-run accident or possibly even a suicide by jumping out in front of a vehicle. Prosecutors have declined to charge anyone in this case. Years later, following Russell's mother's death, An anonymous posting showed up on Craigslist, which implicated a suspect in Russell's death, but this claim may or may not be true. It read, quote, "In 1989, Russell Evans was killed by ex-Ferris high school students. One of them told me he did it and he graduated from Ferris in 1988. This is how I was told for what happened which killed Russell Evans." A four-door car full with 4 18 to 20-year-old young adults sitting in the back seats of that car was a Daryl, not Darnell, and the killer Thomas J. Crow, TJ. Thomas J. Grow, TJ, told me they were driving down the hill and they saw a tall kid walking on the side of the road. And Thomas J. Grow said they just wanted to scare the kid. The car pulled up next to Russell Evans, like the Dukes of Hazzard, and grabbed a hold of Russell Evans and took off down the hill, holding Russell Evans along the side of the car. When the car took off down the hill, holding onto Russell Evans, Russell's long legs went back and under the rear wheel of the car, while Russell Evans was being held by Thomas J. Grow, TJ, through the back door window of the car, and Russell Evans' feet were ran over by the rear wheel. That is how Russell Evans' shoe was found at the top of the heel and how the shoe had come off from Russell Evans. At the bottom of the heel, Thomas J. Grow, TJ, let Russell Evans go, and that is where Russell Evans had died. Remember that Russell Evans was a tall 12-year-old that maybe was thought to be older because of his height. Thomas J. Grow, a year after Russell Evans' murder, had gone to Washington's Walla Walla State Prison for around 7 years for an assault charge. TJ Grow is the murderer who told me he was involved. With what is said above, you can even ask TJ Grow's girlfriend Holly. I'm sure he told her. Also, if anyone would like to debate me on what I was told, then why don't you first do forensics on the 2 shoes found on the hill for tie rubber? Sadly, both of Russell's are now deceased. Sadly, both of Russell's parents are now deceased. His father died in 1998 and his mother passed away in 2011. Russell's sister Diana, who was 5 years old at the time, is still hoping to find out what really happened to her brother. And as of today, this case remains unsolved. 29-year-old Sharon Hammock lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1996. She had 2 children and was pregnant with another child on the way. Sharon was a sex worker and had addiction issues when it came to drugs. Her family's attempts to get her into rehabilitation programs failed due to her lack of health insurance. Sharon's body was found on October 3, 1996 in Kent County, Michigan. She had been assaulted and strangled. Sharon had been rolled up in a blanket and dumped on the side of the road. A delivery driver discovered her body on the same day her life was taken. Was the 9th body found of a dozen women in the 1990s in and around Michigan Grand Rapids area. Unlike Sharon, most of the victims' remains had already become skeletal by the time they were found. The majority of the 12 Michigan victims had addiction issues and did the same work as Sharon did. A local task force was formed in 1996 to investigate the 12 cases. They questioned a lot of people, followed up on leads, but were unable to make any arrests for a very long time. Then finally, in August of 2022, 64-year-old Gary Dean Artman was arrested in connection with Sharon's case. He was taken into custody in Mississippi and is currently waiting to be taken back to Michigan. His DNA matched the male DNA found in Sharon's body along with DNA found on the rope used to tie her up. He is also a suspect in a similar case of a woman who disappeared outside of Los Angeles, whose remains were later found in Maryland. The same male DNA was found in both this victim and Sharon. A detective working the case said, familial DNA was done on both the Grand Rapids case and the Maryland case. It was determined that the assailant in each case was in fact the same person. Artman, by his own admission, was living and working near Sharon's crime scene and was present in the state of Michigan when her life was taken. It was also discovered that before the other victim's body was found in Maryland, she was in Ontario, California. Artman was within 20 miles of Ontario at the same time she was. It's not clear yet if the investigators suspect that Artman is responsible for any of the 11 other victims in the Grand Rapids area. Artman was previously incarcerated for 11 years in Michigan on a charge of first-degree criminal conduct. Sharon's younger sister, Tina the Young, said that the arrest had brought up a lot of emotions. "We got him. Mama, we got justice for her." Tina said at the press conference, looking toward the sky in a gesture to her deceased parents. I'm sorry it didn't happen before the good Lord took you, but justice will be served. You can celebrate with her up there. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.